Rahman Rahim. Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ba'd. Alright, so we left off at verse 20, and we are still in section 4. We're going to be completing section 4 and then starting section 5, inshallah. So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, so we were talking about, quick recap. So, we were talking about in this section fornication and what is the punishment for people who engage in adultery or fornication, called for witnesses. And then we talked about the punishment that's going to be there and about whom Allah accepts forgiveness from, who Allah does not accept forgiveness from. And it talked about how it's wrong to inherit women against their will, and talked about the bride gift, the mahar that you give. So now it's talking about some rules of marriage. We just talked about fornication and adultery, illicit relationships, and it's talking about marriage. So the two of them are connected. And remember, we are in which surah are we covering again? What surah is it, Riza? Surat An-Nisaa, which means what? Don't know what it means, but what does it mean? The women. Good. All right. So there's all these rules concerning women, and then Allah says, وَإِنْ أَرَدْتُمُ اسْتِبْدَالَ زَوْجٍ مَكَانَ زَوْجٍ وَآتَيْتُمْ إِحْدَاهُنَّ قِنْطَارًا فَلَا تَأْخُذُوا مِنْهُ شَيْئًا. If you desire to replace one wife with another, and you have given, or even if you've given the former wife a heap of gold, do not take any of it back. And a heap of gold means like you gave a bride gift, you gave a mahar of a very high amount. Or even you gave, sometimes people they give gifts before marriage, but it's not part of the mahar. So you really like someone, you have a fiance, you're engaged to her, and you have promised that you're going to give her, let's say, $3,000 as a bride gift, a mahar. But then you're, meeting with the family, and you go and you visit each other, and you say, you know what, I bought you an engagement ring. And I bought you a sweater, $200 sweater, very expensive sweater, but $100 sweater. I don't know what the female sweaters are different than male sweater prices. So I bought you some whatever. I bought you some gifts, and then what happens is that these are gifts that have been transferred over. If the marriage doesn't go through, you don't take your gifts back. Gift is a gift, you've given it. But the mahar, the bride gift that you promised, the $3,000, if the marriage doesn't go through, you're not going to give it. But if you do the marriage, then you have to pay that bride gift. The mahar is transferred over. So now it's saying that if you want to replace one wife with another, meaning you want to divorce your current wife, and you're planning on going and getting remarried again and marrying somebody else, and you gave the first wife that you married, you gave her so much money. You gave her, instead of giving her $3,000, you gave her $25,000 mahar. It's a lot of money. Let's say $50,000. Some people I've seen ridiculous amount, in the millions, right? You give $1 million, and then let's say you were married for 1 year, or 5 years, whatever, and it didn't work out. And now you're saying, you know what, man, just 1 year of marriage cost me $1 million. Like this, that's a lot of money. Allah describes it as like a heap of gold. You gave her a ton of money, right? He says, do not take any of it back. So Allah is telling you, if that's what you promised, that's what you gave, don't try to take it back. So how would you even take it back? Allah is going to explain how would you take it back. So don't try to figure out some way to take all of that money back. So how would people, imagine somebody got married and they give $1 million of mahar, and their marriage only lasted for 1 year, and now they say, man, I shouldn't have done that. I was in love and everything was looking good, but the marriage really just didn't work out. So, أَتَأْخُذُونَهُ بُهْتَانًا وَإِثْمًا مُبِينًا. Would you take it through slander and clear sin? So what happened is, I think we saw this before. Yes, we saw this before about, people would mistreat their wives to make them return some of the bride gift that they had given them. So it's reminding them, it doesn't matter how much money you gave, you still are not going to mistreat your wife to force her or pressure her to give the mahar that you had given her and to take it back for yourself. And then what people would do is they would do what's called buhtan. Buhtan means you make a false accusation. So some husbands, when they would give a lot of money, let's say they wanted to marry a woman and she said, well, I'm from a very high class family and my family is well known in the whole community, and look, I have, we're royal family. My name is Maryam the seventh, she's like, she's like, I'm the seventh in the lineage of like dynasty of different Maryams or something like that. And now all of a sudden you're like, you know what, I gave her so much money, she asked for so much money, and you gave it to her, but now the marriage didn't work out. So what some people would do is they say, you know what, she didn't do anything wrong, but this marriage is not working out. I'm going to make a false accusation against her. You know what? I think she was cheating on me. And therefore, you know what? Because you're cheating on me, you should, you should return my mahar back. You should ask for khula and get out of the marriage rather than me pronouncing talaq. So Allah is saying, would you try to take your money back that you gave her through slander by making a false accusation about her when you know it's not true? And that is a clear sin. How could you do that in order to take your money back? So this would happen in Arab society, that if a man wanted to divorce his wife, he would accuse her of cheating on him so that he could get all of his money back. Now what's interesting here in this verse, it says, وَآتَيْتُمْ إِحْدَاهُنَّ قِنْطَارًا. The word qintar means a treasure, like a heap of gold, like a lot of money. Qintar means like a treasure chest full of gold, right? So if you've given her that much money, then you still can't take it back. But you should have thought about that before. So when the Prophet, peace be upon him, passed away, who became the first Khalifa, the first ruler of the Muslims? Jabir, Abu Bakr Siddiq. Who was the second one after him? Umar. So Umar became the Khalifa. And when Umar was the Khalifa, see, Abu Bakr was only Khalifa. How long was Abu Bakr the Khalifa? Does anybody know? Yeah. 2 years. He was only Khalifa for 2 years. So the Muslim community, there wasn't that much time to develop. There were some battles going on with the Persian Empire and with the Roman Empire. So Umar became Khalifa, and he was Khalifa for a very long time. And the Muslim society began changing because they dominated the Roman Empire. They dominated the Persian Empire. Now there's so many more people coming into Islam. There's more technology. There's more development of society for good and bad. So Umar wanted to institute some rules. He was like a new type of, a new government has come, and he's like the person who's putting in stop signs. Like today we have stop signs and we had red lights and we have some protocols like, this much tax and this regulation, hazardous materials being stored in a warehouse. The Muslim community was becoming a very advanced civilization. So he's introducing new rules into the society to protect the society from harm. So one of the rules that Umar came up with, he said, I'm noticing that we have a problem in marriage in the Muslim community during Umar's time. And he said, what's happening is women are asking for too much money as mahar. And it's becoming very difficult for guys to get married. People are not getting married because some women are asking for way too much money, and then they remain unmarried, or the guy is, putting his whole life savings into the marriage. It's causing problems. And think about this. This is only like a few years after the Prophet ﷺ passed away. So we talk about problems of, oh yeah, this is problem in the Muslim community about marriage and about divorce and all that. This was happening during the time of Umar. So Umar came up and he decided, I'm going to put a ceiling on the amount of mahar that any woman can ask for. So we're going to make a maximum limit. You're not allowed to ask for more than this amount of money. So he was giving a khutbah, he was giving a lecture and announcing this to the community. And there was an old woman in the audience. And when she heard what Umar was doing, he said, this is not right. And women are asking for too much money. And we're going to put a maximum. She's not allowed to ask for more than this amount of money. The woman interrupted Umar in the middle of his lecture. And she quoted this verse of the Quran. And she said, what you're doing is wrong. Allah said in the Quran that if you have given them a qintar, if you've given them an entire treasure, a whole heap of gold as mahar, then don't try to take any of it back. He said, if Allah mentioned that it's okay to give a heap of mahar, He did not criticize it in the Quran, then who are you to put a rule that we're going to put a limit and a ceiling in the community. You're not allowed to do that. So Omar stopped and he said, you know what, this woman is right. He publicly said, you know what, this woman is right. She made a really good point, and I'm not going to put a upper limit on the mahar. So it was not a good practice, but she made a point by quoting this verse, and Omar accepted this point. So this is an interesting story. Talks about the history of kind of what happened there at that time. Now it says, would you take it by false accusation of slander? Now, this comes back down to the idea of divorce. So the issue with divorce has always been a challenge in history. So the challenge in history has been, I hope this thing doesn't go in my mouth. I don't mind it, it still wants to go in my mouth. All right. So divorce was a problem in Christianity, in Catholicism, because you could not divorce. Divorce was not allowed. We talked about this before. And Catholics still don't allow divorce. Now, Protestants changed, and they allow it if you can prove that there's adultery. So what ends up happening is, if you're a Protestant and you want to get divorced, you say, you know what, we have to prove adultery. What does that lead to? There's no other way for you to get divorced unless you have this. So what did it lead to? It led to buhtan, massive false accusations of adultery, just so people could get out of the marriage. And this happened with King Henry. This happened with Edward VIII, King Henry VIII. They wanted to get divorced. The Pope wouldn't allow them, and they started their own church. Margaret wanted to marry Townsend. She wasn't able to do it because of the rules of divorce, and so many other rules and stuff. Hindus, same problem. Divorce is not allowed. So in Christianity, there's something that's very common. They say, till death do us part. Literally means till death do us part. Hindus is on the more literal side. Till death do us part. There's a principle. We talked about this in one of our earlier classes. There's a concept known as sati. Does anyone remember what sati was? Yes. What was sati?
Basically, the bride gets buried with the guy when he dies.
So the bride, you said the bride gets buried with the guy when he dies. Except they don't do burial in Hinduism. They do cremation. So the woman gets burned alive with her husband because she's considered owner property of her husband, and it's literally till death do us part. And she will die when he dies. So this is exactly what Allah is talking about, criticizing and saying, you're going to throw out slanderous accusation to get your money back. This is what happened to other religions. In Protestantism, because they made this loophole of adultery, you can get divorced if you claim adultery, that your wife cheated on you, then you can get out. So all these false accusations began coming through. That's why Allah puts these rules in Islam. وَكَيْفَ تَأْخُذُونَهُ وَقَدْ أَفْضَى بَعْضُكُمْ إِلَى بَعْضٍ. How could you take it back, the bridal gift, after having enjoyed each other intimately? وَأَخَذْنَ مِنْكُمْ مِيثَاقًا غَلِيظًا. And she has taken from you a firm commitment. So what this means basically is that once you have consummated the marriage, you cannot take that bridal gift back. But if you have not consummated the marriage, then some of the mahar is going to be given back, and we'll discuss that in some other class. But that's interesting because sometimes people end up getting married and they do the ceremony, but they never end up living together. They never end up moving together, and they just basically meet each other and see each other in the presence of their family or something. So they're married, but then the marriage doesn't work out. But they were never alone together, right, privately, so they never had any intimacy or anything like that. If the marriage doesn't work out, then that affects the bridal gift, and part of the bridal gift is going to have to be given back. So here it says, you've taken from them a firm commitment, meaning that the bridal gift is a requirement of marriage. Mahar is a requirement of marriage, and it's a promise. In fact, even if you didn't specify how much you're going to give and you got married, the marriage is still valid, but you still have to pay her a bride gift. And maybe we'll talk about what that's going to be. وَلَا تَنْكِحُوا مَا نَكَحَ آبَاؤُكُمْ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ إِلَّا مَا قَدْ سَلَفَ. Do not marry former wives of your fathers except what already has happened. Right? So let's continue the rest. إنه كان فاحشة ومقتا وساء سبيلا. It was indeed a shameful, despicable, and evil practice. So this is what used to happen: is that when the father would passed away, the person would go and marry the wife of his father, obviously not his own mother, but a different wife of the father. And this was something that became common because they say, you know what, well, she's not my mother, so therefore it's okay. But in Islam, what is she? So what is your father's wife who's not your mother? What is she called? What is she to you?
Stepmom.
She's your stepmom. But saying you are not allowed to marry your stepmother, even if your father is gone, passed away, divorced her, whatever it is. But in Arabian society, they said, but she's not your mom. She's your stepmom. So it's okay to marry her, and they used to marry her. So what does Allah say? Allah says, number one, this is not allowed. And He said, whatever happened in the past, happened in the past. You're forgiven for it. This is the new rule now, from now on. Don't do this anymore. But not only did He say don't do it, Allah clarified exactly how it is universally bad. Meaning, you people should have figured this out from your own intelligence. You should have figured this out from your fitrah, from your natural disposition. Something is not right about this. So He says, this was a shameful, despicable, and evil practice. Some things, it's not allowed for you to do, but Allah does not condemn it and say, it's so bad, you should have known better. This one is, you should have known better. You should have figured this out on your own, but you didn't? Okay, fine. Whatever happened, happened, but it was so bad what you used to do. This is not going to happen anymore. You are not going to marry the widow of your father when he passes away. Okay. Section 4. Let me move this over. Okay. All right. حرمت عليكم أمهاتكم وبناتكم وأخواتكم وعماتكم وخالاتكم وبنات الأخ وبنات الأخت. So it's forbidden to you. So remember the previous verse it said you're not allowed to marry the wives of your fathers, former wives of your fathers. So it's also forbidden to you for marriage or your mothers. You're not allowed to marry your mother. Now this is talking to men because they were primarily receiving this, but now you flip it around. So if you're a woman, you're not allowed to marry whom? Your father, okay? You're not allowed to marry your daughter. If you're a woman, you're not allowed to marry your son. You can't marry your sister. You can't marry your paternal and maternal aunts, both of them. By the paternal, you cannot marry your aunt. You cannot, so paternal aunt means your aunt. So what is an aunt? Let's define these terms. What is an aunt? Yes. Exactly. Sister of your dad or your mom. So paternal aunt is the sister of your dad. Maternal aunt is the sister of your mom. You're not allowed to marry your brother's daughters. So what is your brother's daughter called?
Niece.
Your niece. And the male version of that is nephew. So you cannot marry your niece, you cannot marry your nephew. You're not allowed to marry your sister's daughters. What are they called? Still, niece and nephew, right? And the list continues. It's supposed to continue. Okay. وأمهاتكم اللاتي أرضعنكم وأخواتكم من الرضاعة وأمهات نسائكم وربائبكم اللاتي في حجوركم من نسائكم اللاتي دخلتم بهن. You cannot marry your milk mother. Okay, so sometimes, in translation, a lot of translations, they say your foster mother. I don't like that term for a translation because foster care, just the foster care system just means someone you've basically brought them into your home and you're taking care of them. That's not what it's talking about here. Your milk mother means that you were suckled or breastfed milk by a woman who's not your own mother. So if she fed you some milk when you were a little baby, you're not allowed to marry her later on. It doesn't matter whatever happens. And you're not allowed to marry your milk sister. So if you were a little baby, you were like 18 months old, and you fed from a woman and another girl who was also let's say she's 12-month, 1-year-old baby, and she was feeding from milk from the same woman, you are considered to be a milk brother and a milk sister. So you two now have a special relationship because you drank milk from the same woman, and therefore you are not allowed to marry each other. Now, this is really important. Should I mention it now or later? Yeah, I'll mention it now. This is really important because what happens to a lot of people is they don't keep track of who is. So what's happening now? This is not only if you drank directly from a woman, but if she squeezed out her milk and then she gave it to somebody else to drink, then what ends up happening is you still have the person who drank that milk and drank the other same milk, you become milk brother and milk sister. So it's very common, especially in California now. A lot of people, they, squeeze out milk, they freeze it, and or they have extra, and then they distribute it to their friends and family, or they sell it. Some people sell milk on Craigslist. They sell it, here and there, because they say breast milk is very healthy. Allah made it that way. So they're selling it for other kids to drink, other babies to drink. The problem here, and also sometimes if you go to a neonatal unit, like for example NICU, the children's intensive care unit, if children are in the hospital or something like that, so it's healthier for them to have natural breast milk rather than formula milk, all the powder mixed in together or something like that. So what ends up happening is they need people to donate this breast milk. So when they donate it, what they end up doing is they're giving it to all these kids, but there is no track being kept of records of whose milk is this and who drank this milk. So if a bunch of different children drank this milk across the board, let's say they were in the hospital or something like that, they should have ended up becoming milk brother and milk sister, such that they will not be able to get married in the future. And this becomes a big issue. So it's a very important thing that you cannot marry your milk sister or your milk mother, which more important, your milk sister, because that's a little bit more common. So if anyone is breastfeeding or is distributing breast milk, you need to keep a record of who did you give it to and who drank this milk, because it's prohibited for you to end up marrying your milk sister. And somebody who does that, it's a problem. Your mother-in-law, you're not allowed to marry your mother-in-law or your father-in-law. So what is a mother-in-law? Your husband or wife's mother, right? So you cannot marry your mother-in-law or your father-in-law. Your stepdaughters in your care if you have consummated marriage with their mothers. So what is a stepdaughter? Exactly. So a daughter or a son that's in your care, that is not yours, but you married their parent, right? So, and they're living in your house, and Allah puts another stipulation that you've consummated marriage with that person. Then it will be. If you have not, and then the marriage doesn't work out and you get divorced, then it's not the case. And the reason why Allah is mentioning this is He's trying to give you a formula for how the prohibition of whom you're allowed to marry and whom you're not allowed to marry, how does it form? And it forms through these intimate relationships, through marriage, but not just contractual marriage, but consummation of contractual marriage. فإن لم تكونوا دخلتم بهن فلا جناح عليكم وحلائل أبنائكم الذين من أصلابكم وأن تجمعوا بين الأختين إلا ما قد سلف. But if you have not, and you didn't consummate the marriage, then you can marry them. Nor you cannot marry the wives of your actual sons. So if you have a son, your son marries someone, and then the marriage doesn't work out and gets divorced, you cannot marry that woman anymore, because what is she to you? What is the wife of your son called? Daughter-in-law. So you cannot marry your daughter-in-law if your child or your son or your brother or your son-in-law. You cannot marry them if the marriage didn't work out with them. They are forbidden forever. But it says your actual sons. What about your adopted son? Your adopted son is not your real son, so it's not going to be prohibited. Nor can you marry two sisters together at the same time. You cannot do that because it'll be just too much. They're too close to each other, and it'll open up the door for too much conflict. Except what was done previously, meaning that before this revelation came down, that's forgiven. But this is the new rule. So it doesn't say this was an evil way like it was in the other one. But this is a rule that's there for your protection. Now the Prophet, peace be upon him, in a hadith, he added one more rule. And he said, by analogy, if you're not allowed to marry two sisters at once, you're also not allowed to marry someone that's almost as close as two sisters. Which pairing of two women are almost as close as two sisters, such that you should not be able to marry them at the same time?
Cousins.
If two of them are cousins to each other, yeah, no, good guess, but no. Closer than that. What's closer than cousins? Because see all these rules right here, if you map this out in like a chart, you will see like, okay, I'm not allowed to marry this person, not allowed to marry this person, but everyone else I'm allowed to marry. You will begin to figure out the connections between, well, how close does a family member have to be so that you're either allowed to marry them or you're not allowed to marry them. Are you allowed to marry your cousin, technically? Yes. Are you allowed to marry your aunt?
No.
No. Are you allowed to marry someone that's like your aunt, but she's not your actual aunt? Yes, she's not your actual aunt, right? So there are rules, right? There are rules set in place. So the Prophet looked at this verse and he came up with his own rule and said, if you're not allowed to marry two sisters at the same time, you're also not allowed to marry, anyone know? No, well, yes, that too, milk sisters included, but you're also not allowed to marry a woman and her aunt at the same time because they're too close in relationship, so it'll cause problems. Inna Allah kana ghafuran rahima. Indeed, Allah is forgiving and merciful. Last verse, inshallah. Where are we? 24. وَالْمُحْصَنَاتُ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ إِلَّا مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ. Also forbidden for marriage are married women. So women who are already married, they're forbidden for you to get married to. Now this should kind of be obvious, but it's not obvious. The reason why it's not obvious is there has been in history and today a big problem with what's this idea of what's called like wife swapping. So in the communist movement, who's heard of communism? Soviet Union communism. So in the extreme communist view, and modern day society, extreme communist view is that any woman can be the wife of any man in society because we're all comrades, right? So we share money and we share wives and husbands together. And this is not a new thing. This actually happened in ancient Persian society. It happened in the hippie movements, in the, what are hippies? History lesson, another day, inshallah. So hippie movements in the United States and in many what they used to call like primitive tribes, savage tribes, primitive tribes throughout the world. It used to be very common for people to share wives. It's called wife swapping. And there's a book, it's an old book, but Westermarck, he wrote a book called A Short History of Marriage, and he identifies the type of primitive, tribes and stuff that used to do this practice of wife swapping. So what happened was, in one verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibited this practice and said, you are not allowed to marry a woman who is already married. It's absolutely unacceptable. And what's interesting is the wording that's used. Allah says, وَالْمُحْصَنَاتُ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ. Muhsan means, it doesn't just mean a married woman. The word comes from the word, have any of you heard of this book called Fortress of the Muslim? It's got a bunch of du'as in there, you probably heard of it, right? So that Arabic title is called Hisnul Muslim, Fortress of the Muslim. So Hisn means fortress. Muhsan is from the exact same word of fortress. So these are women who are fortified. Like they're guarded, there's a fence around them, meaning they're in a marriage, they're married to somebody else. So muhsan means that they're protected, they're guarded, and the concept is a concept of chastity, meaning they're protected, they're pure because they're in a marriage. The modern concept of marriage, unfortunately, is people, they feel like, once you get married, you're stuck. You can't have freedom to do other things, and you feel like your life is over and all that stuff. This is not what Islam says. Islam has this beautiful concept, the concept of marriage and having, a connection between the two, and they're in a proper relationship. Now, there's also another modern movement called, I know I'm getting a little bit, more on the adult side here, but there's a movement called swinging, right? And it's becoming very, very popular. It's like wife swapping. And swinging is becoming very common in society. There are movies about it, it's being shown in movies, and there are books being written about these two terms. Now, these are two popular terms now. One of the terms is called non monogamy, and this does not mean polygyny like in Islam. You can have more than one wife, up to four, which we discussed. Non monogamy and what are called open relationships is this new term where it just basically means you're married to someone and you both agree, but we can go ahead and keep on having relationship with other people and no one's going to have a problem with it. And the most, famous celebrity gossip person that has gone through this, does anyone know? Yeah. Will Smith and his wife Jada Pinkett Smith. It's the same issue. Again, I don't follow celebrity gossip, so you have to correct me if any of this is wrong. I don't care about any of this, but she's researched it, and I hear people in the community talking about it, right? So she wanted to have an open relationship, which means she's married to Will Smith, but she wants to go and have relationships with other guys while being married at the same time. So this is becoming so common, so popular, that if you go to a library and you go into the relationship or marriage section, you'll find entire books talking about how we need to move to a society where we're accepting of open relationships. And it's becoming a trend almost. So this is very concerning. So what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say about this? Not allowed. In one verse, women who are already married cannot be married. Right? So it's pretty simple. All right, so we'll leave it at that. We're out of time. We'll continue this verse, inshallah, from verse 24. Any questions from today? Jabir.
So, the first verse you're saying that the men, they can't get they can't get whatever they paid for the women. But the solution is, why can't you just marry more than one? Like, why do they have to divorce and then remarry again?
They don't have to, but what if they find that they can't fulfill the rights of that wife, or it's just becoming difficult to deal with them or something like that, then they're allowed to leave. Usually the case is if she is being the problem, then then he basically has to leave her. But if she's not a problem at all and he wants to leave her, then he should leave the amount of bridal gift that he gave her with her.
And then, so the last verse you were mentioning about two sisters can't marry each other, nor sister and aunt they can marry each other.
Yeah.
Technically, it's not even possible because female. It's not like.
Why is it not possible? Why is it not possible? Yeah. Oh, you mean a sister cannot marry a sister? No, no, no. It's saying a man cannot marry two sisters. That's what the verse is saying. Yeah.
So you mentioned that Christians can't divorce, right?
Historically.
You said that in your divorce seminar, you said there's a story about on Facebook that you released a post and it accidentally went out to the Christian community, and then remember that?
No, I don't remember that story.
Yeah.
What did I say?
No, and then they said, showed that Muslims can divorce or whatever, and then they all got mad. They're like, "Oh, that's what you Muslims do," stuff like that.
Oh, about divorcing.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
So they got all.
What was the thing that I posted? It was an article
It was an article, yeah.
about how Christians.
No, it was about how Muslims can divorce or something like that. How it's fine.
Oh, how it's fine. Oh, and some Christians got upset about it. That's the problem with you guys. Oh, okay. I'll do it. Yeah, it's still have a problem with it. Yes, Isa. How would you know who's your milk brother and milk sister? So your parents should tell you. Your parents should tell you, Because yeah, exactly. That's a great question actually, because you won't remember if you're like 1.5 years old. You won't remember. So that's a fantastic question, mashallah. Yes, she's philosopher, mashallah. Yes, so your parents have to tell you, or some of your family members have to tell you what happened, and they should write it down just to be on the safe side, so that you remember it just in case something happens. Yeah. When who? Umar bin Khattab. Yeah. He wanted to set a ceiling for the amount of mahr. Yeah. Okay. So how does this happen? So Umar ibn Khattab was the Khalifa. So he's the leader of the Muslims, and he's allowed to introduce new laws into the society for the betterment of society. So, for example, when he used to go to the marketplace and he would see some people are doing cheating in their business, and sometimes rice would get wet and they would leave the wet rice, underneath, so they wouldn't show that the rice had been going out. So he would come and introduce new rules. Sometimes he would consult with his companions and then come up with the rule. Sometimes he would just come up with the rule on his own. And so in this case, maybe he consulted. Maybe he consulted with Ali and with Uthman, or with other companions, and then he was making the announcement to the general community that after consultation, we are putting a new rule in place. So somebody from the public, right, non-leadership, complained. That woman, she complained. And after he heard her complaint and she quoted the verse in the Quran, he thought about it and he says, you know what? She's right. We're going to cancel that rule. So he changed his mind. He changed his mind after declaring the rule in the public. Okay? Yeah, Umar.
So when you talked about the mahed and you can't take it back even if it's like a big amount.
Yeah.
So from what I understand, mahed is not technically due. You have the option to pay it later if the wife agrees, right?
Yes.
So what if it's postponed and you don't give her any of that mahed, but you got married? And then you get divorced before you give her that mahed.
Can you waive it?
Yeah.
Yeah, no. So once the mahr is agreed upon, if you divorce, it remains a debt. So it's like any other debt. You don't just write off a debt. You're going to still keep on paying it for however long it takes. Unless she forgives it voluntarily. Right? She gives it back to you. Yes. They say what? They sell milk online, yeah. Yes, that's the problem with selling the milk online. They will become milk brothers and sisters of anyone else who bought that milk from the same woman, and they wouldn't even know. And that becomes a huge problem. Huge problem. Yeah, you have a question too? A little bit louder. What would happen if they got married and then they found out later on that they were milk brother and milk sister? They would have to get divorced. They would have to be separated because that's considered an invalid marriage. Yeah, and so you don't want to go through that. That would be so painful that you already were with someone, so they would have to be separated. It happened in the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Actually, yes. Yeah.
Because if you offer the mahr and that you are not consummate marriage, then
Yeah. We said we're
cannot keep all of it.
Yeah. We said we're gonna cover that in another class, inshallah. Yeah. So some of it has to be back. Yeah. Anyone else? Okay, Jabir.
Okay. Why do parents sometimes let their babies drink from other milk sources besides their mom?
Oh, so why would parents allow any kids to drink from another milk source? For two reasons. Number one, maybe the mother's milk has dried up and she's not producing milk. So what's the option? Give cow milk, or give formula milk, powdered milk, or something like that, or give somebody else's human milk. The human milk is healthier. There's been so much research that's shown the human milk is much healthier. The second reason is, three reasons. So second reason is maybe she's busy and she doesn't have time. She's going to work or something's happening. She's on a family trip, and the child is left in the care as like a babysitter when the child is still a baby. So someone needs to feed that child, and that child is not eating solid food yet. The child has not been weaned, so it needs milk. So someone else will give it milk. And this even happened to the Prophet, peace be upon him, right? He had a milk mother as well. And the third reason is sometimes some families want to create a milk relationship between two babies so that when they grow up, they will be mahram and they're not going to be able to be married to each other. And there's some wisdom behind. They wanted to have some closeness between these two families for whatever reason. Yeah, so they're not allowed to marry each other. Yes. Okay.
So in those cases, though, they have to have fed a certain number of times.
There's a difference of opinion about whether it's 5 times or whether it's even 1 drop of milk has come into the. Yeah,
So in those cases where someone says it has to be 5 times, would that be the same case for the interpretation of the verse that you went over? That
it would be the same. Yeah, it would be the same if the opinion of the 5 times, but the opinion of the 5 times, which half the scholars say 5 and half the scholars say 1 drop. The opinion of the 5 feedings to make it impermissible helps in the neonatal care units of the ICU, because then you only have a few drops coming into the child from different mothers that are all being mixed, so it's not going to amount to 5 feedings. So that's the general fatwa that's given right now in the meantime. But generally, breast milk should be tracked when you're selling it or when you're giving it to a hospital, and that should be the standard practice even in the Muslim countries. Some of them are not doing that. So we get questions about this from different countries to the Fiqh Council about what should we do if it's in a giant cauldron, what's happening, this and that. So, no. Any other questions? Okay, we'll leave it at that. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Any cookies?
Don't have